Hello, and look at what's happening at uranium. This is URA, Uranium ETF, and look at this meteoric rise, all since just after the middle of August. How amazing, a move from under $18 to nearly $25. And actually, if you look at this post I published on 23rd of August at myfinancesteacher.org, you'll notice that our entry to this trade was somewhere around $18.7 over here on that 23rd of August. And so far, this trade is doing wonderfully well. So in light of these impressive developments in the uranium industry and uranium prices, let's have a look at our uranium report. All the data I present to you in this report comes from the EIA and SRC reports, so you can easily verify all of this data. Let's start with recent developments in demand versus production, where in 2020, last year, demand outstripped production by 57 million pounds. And in percentage terms, that's nearly a third of total demand for that year in 2020. And for this year, for 2021, the expectation is that demand for uranium is again going to exceed production by around 47 million pounds. All of this excess demand is currently reducing inventories that dozens of nuclear reactors are holding. So just for these 2 years of 2020 and 2021, the production deficit lagging behind consumption by the reactors is over 100 million pounds, which of course is a positive sign for attractive price gains into the future. Here is another look at production shortages. As of December last year, the blue line, we see that going into the future, 1 year from December last year, 2 years, 3 years, and further into the future, the production shortage is only going to grow. And amazingly, this line, both blue and the brown lines, show annual rather than cumulative shortfalls in production. For cumulative numbers, which are outstandingly large, you can look at this table over here. At the right side of the table, the cumulative numbers show that by 2030, expected unfilled uranium market requirements are going to be nearly 190 million pounds. So going into the future, we can be more or less certain that dozens and dozens, hundreds of nuclear reactors are going to see their inventories dwindle all the way down to zero, and they're going to go out into the markets to purchase more uranium supplies. What effect do you think it's going to have on uranium prices? What effect do you think it's going to have on the share prices of uranium producers? Perhaps the recent rally in URA, which by the way we managed to catch really well at myfinancesteacher.org. So this recent rally is going to turn into a child's play versus what's going to come into the uranium industry over the next several years. And talking about the next several years, there are lots of other developments, such as rapid development of small reactors, which are going to pop up all over the place, raising the future demand for uranium considerably higher. This technology of small reactors is still relatively new and under development, but again, over the long term of the next several years, this is going to be a very important factor pushing the uranium prices considerably higher. Another factor that you have to take into account is that over the last years, a push for environmentally friendly technology is becoming very serious. And nuclear is actually perhaps the only energy source that is capable to produce baseload electricity generation without any emissions. So this factor is also going to play a very important role going into the future. Talking about the long-term contracts for supplies of uranium to the nuclear reactors, power reactors, by the year 2025, 3/4 of the demand by those nuclear reactors is not going to be covered by at least currently outstanding long-term contracts. So again, as I mentioned, it is quite certain that new negotiations, new purchases by these nuclear reactors are upcoming, perhaps over the next 1 or 2 years. Let's see if those negotiations are going to lead to a restart of MacArthur and other similarly closed mines. That will be very interesting to observe over the next few years. Here is the data about those long-term contracts going into 2026 in a more visual form. The blue columns over here represent the maximum amount subscribed for by these long-term contracts. But those contracts also stipulate a lower minimum threshold as well, which is represented in the middle of this table at the top of the chart. So as the illustration shows, over the next several years, from 2021 into 2023 and even into 2025, generally the quantities subscribed for under these long-term contracts decline considerably from over 6 million pounds to somewhere around 3 million pounds anywhere between 2023 to 2025. So as I mentioned, a lot of new negotiations for new long-term contracts are probably upcoming from a lot of existing reactors, but what's interesting is that there are new reactors being built all the time. Currently, there are 31 countries that operate 444 reactors all over the world. And just this year, in 2021, 2 more reactors were added to that lot of 444, and also just this year, 2 more reactors went into construction stage. So as we see, demand at current levels is already outpacing production of uranium, but even beyond that, with development of small reactors and with ongoing construction of currently large reactors, there is a very attractive, very intriguing future in the uranium industry. Next, let's have a look at a particular situation at some of the largest of these 31 countries. In the US, there is a big push away from coal-fired power generators into natural gas, into uranium, and into renewable sources of energy. A lot of these coal-fired power generators are already old and will eventually retire, whether that's in the next few years or in the next decade. Currently in the US, there are 60 reactors that have applied for an extension of their operations. They hope to extend their operations up to a lifetime of 60 years. So the existing nuclear generators are not likely to retire anytime soon. And in addition to that, we see new generators coming up. There are 40 applications for new reactors in the US. 2 are already under construction. And there are concrete plans for 20 reactors. So if all of these applications are approved, that's another 60 or more reactors just in the US. Meaning that with a larger amount of nuclear reactors, nuclear power generators, the purchases of uranium by these nuclear power generators are going to increase. This chart in front of you shows the uranium purchases by owners and operators of nuclear power reactors. And as you see, over the last nearly 20 years, the purchases have generally been going down from around 67 million pounds back in 2005-2006, all the way down to about 40 million pounds in 2018. The trend seems to have reversed already, with the more recent purchases back in 2020 at around 48 million pounds. And as you see, the blue section of all of these columns is generally the largest. These are the purchases from foreign suppliers. We'll come back to the foreign versus domestic supply in the US in a minute or two. Before we continue, let me remind you guys to subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and click that bell notification. Thanks a lot. Next, let's move on to China, where China is planning to add another 80 reactors within the next 15 years. And over 230 reactors by the year 2050. And even right now, there are already 14 nuclear reactors under construction. So we see a huge growth in nuclear power in China, and perhaps over the next several years, perhaps somewhere into 2030, China might actually catch up or maybe even overtake the US in its nuclear power generation. Moving on to India, India has 23 reactors right now, with 6 more under construction and 40 more reactors planned by 2050. So what we see over here is that the number of reactors is going to nearly triple over the next few decades. That is a huge growth in demand for uranium. Moving on to Russia. Russia has 38 reactors right now, but they're also adding. 3 are currently under construction, and more than 40 reactors are also planned going into the future. So the long-term outlook for uranium producers is simply outstanding. But for more details and regular updates, consider joining us at myfinanceteacher.org. And coming back to our uranium report, we see strong growth in nuclear power generation in many places all over the world. How come the uranium prices have been relatively low over the last few years? Well, one of the reasons for that is large inventories. This is a chart of inventories going back all the way to 1996. And as you see, over the last 5 to 10 years, inventories have actually been quite high, which reduces the purchases of uranium by the power generators from the producers and diminishes the uranium prices. But what we observe over the last 5 to 6 years is a decline in these inventories, where the blue section of these columns are the inventories held by the nuclear power generators, and the brown section of these columns are the inventories held by the producers of uranium. We see that from late 90s and into 2010-2011, the blue area expands while the brown area shrinks. That represents a lot of purchases of inventories by the nuclear power generators from uranium producers. After those purchases slowed down, as I said, in 2012-2011, we see uranium prices drop significantly. For example, from around $95–100 in 2008, all the way down to $40 in 2012, and even lower in 2014 and in 2017. What we are going to see over the next few years is these inventories are going to dwindle because demand, as we've seen, outstrips supply by more than 100 million pounds just in 2 years of 2020 and 2021. So that's 100 million pound shortfall from production is simply going to devour almost all of these inventories. And once that happens, perhaps sometime into 2022, what do you think will happen to the uranium prices? Let me know what you think in the comments below. I'm really curious, how high do you think the uranium prices can shoot up? And in the meantime, while you are typing up down in the comments, let's have a look at the range of prices over here. At $40 per pound, the economically recoverable reserves of uranium right now at known deposits is around 715,000 tons, which at current consumption is going to last for around only 11 years. But remember, this current consumption is going to grow drastically with introduction of new power generators over the next few years. If you plug in the $80 per pound, the economically recoverable reserves increase to about 1.28 million tons, which again, at current consumption levels, is going to last for 19 years. And if we plug in the price of $130 per pound, by the way, is that likely over the next 2 to 3 years? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Anyway, at $130 per pound, the economically recoverable reserves are around 3.86 million tons, lasting for around 56 years at current production levels, which are again expected to grow significantly. And talking about these current consumption levels, let's see what the history shows us. This is the amount of uranium loaded into those power generators as we see from early 2000s into 2011, 2012, 2013. This consumption has actually declined from somewhere around 63 million pounds all the way down to around 43 million pounds. All of that, of course, has suppressed uranium prices, but things seem to be recovering right now. And at those suppressed uranium prices, the producers don't want to give up their inventories, and they don't want to give up their deposits, their reserves in the ground, the deposits for the cheap either. Kazatomprom from Kazakhstan, for example, has been reducing their production of uranium all the way since 2017. And cameco has been reducing production as well, with some of the noticeable examples of the closure of a MacArthur River mine and a handful of other mines as well. So clearly the prices are still too low and the future outlook is simply energizing. But beyond that, there are more interesting factors, such as the US planning to build up its strategic reserves of uranium. The US is planning to buy $150 million worth of uranium every year over the next 10 years. For 2021, those purchases translate into somewhere around 19 million pounds annually. Additionally, as part of this plan, the US is planning to reform land access for mining, which presumably is going to make uranium mining that much easier, perhaps helping to push those uranium price shares that much higher. Again, for more details on prices, consider joining us at myfinancesteacher.org. And lastly, US is also planning to finance more advanced uranium technology. By the way, talking about technology, what's also interesting is a development in enrichment services, which is also going to become essential as demand for uranium increases over the next several years. We see that enrichment services over the last 8 years or so, from 2012 to 2013, has increased from just over 12 million work units to over 14 million work units. And over the last 15 years or so, we see that most of the increase in these enrichment services are actually located in the US. So that's another factor to take into account when you are choosing some of your miners and service providers. For more, check out myfinancesteacher.org. For now, let me leave you with this question. Where do you see uranium price in early 2022? Let me know in the comments below. And of course, while you are there, remember to hit the like button and share this video with your friends. Have a nice day and good luck in your trades.